Most people will never be truly understood, and that's not a tragedy. That's a strategy. You've been told your whole life to be open, to be authentic, to let people in. You've been handed this idea that vulnerability is strength, that transparency builds trust, that if you just show people who you really are, they'll respect you for it. And you believed it. Of course you did. Everyone around you believed it too. That's exactly the problem. Because while you were busy being readable, while you were performing your authenticity, broadcasting your intentions, signaling your emotions like a broken traffic light, the people who actually move the world were doing something entirely different. They were becoming unknowable. They were learning the oldest power move in human history, the art of not being understood. This isn't about manipulation. This isn't about being cold or distant or broken. This is about something far more dangerous. This is about the psychological architecture of people who consistently win in business, in relationships, in life, and the one trait they almost never talk about. Because if you can be read, you can be managed. And if you can be managed, you've already lost. Think about what it costs you when people can predict you. Think about the last time someone knew exactly how you'd react to something. Maybe it was a coworker who understood that if they framed the request a certain way, you'd say yes. Maybe it was a partner who knew exactly which buttons to press to throw you off balance. Maybe it was a negotiation where the other side could see the desperation underneath your composed exterior, and they used it to drain every last bit of value out of the deal. That's not bad luck. That's the price of being readable. When people understand your patterns, they don't respect those patterns, they exploit them. This is not a cynical worldview, it's a documented psychological reality. Robert Cialdini spent decades studying influence and persuasion, and what he found, underneath all the theory, was devastatingly simple. Predictability is a vulnerability. When you behave in consistent, readable ways, you become a system that can be gamed. And here is where most people make the fatal mistake. They think the solution is to become more guarded, to build walls, to go silent, to project some cold stoic exterior. But that's just a different kind of readable. The silent guy in the corner is just as predictable as the guy who overshares at every dinner table. You can read him too. His silence is a signal. His distance is a pattern. What you actually need is something subtler and far more powerful. You need controlled unpredictability. You need to become the kind of person that people cannot map. Not because you're inconsistent, not because you're erratic, but because you've learned to move in ways that don't broadcast your interior world to everyone watching. The people who never develop this, and that is most people, by the way, that is the overwhelming majority of human beings walking around right now, they spend their entire lives being shaped by other people's perceptions of them. They get managed at work. They get handled in relationships. They get underestimated in rooms where the stakes matter most. And they never understand why, because they've been told their whole lives that openness is the answer. Openness is not the answer. Depth is the answer. And depth, by definition, cannot be fully seen. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something about human beings that made him one of the most hated and most studied thinkers in Western history. In The Prince, he wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Most people read that line and recoil. They think it's monstrous. And that reaction, that immediate emotional rejection, is itself proof that they don't understand what Machiavelli was actually talking about. He wasn't advocating cruelty. He was describing a psychological truth about perception and power, that people treat you according to the story they've constructed about you. And if that story is too complete, too comfortable, too fully understood, you lose your leverage. The most powerful figures in history, across every domain, shared one quality that historians consistently underplay. They were difficult to fully know. Augustus Caesar presented different faces to the Senate, the military, and the Roman public, not out of dishonesty, but out of a sophisticated understanding that total transparency destroys authority. Eleanor Roosevelt was famously described by people who knew her for decades as someone who still contained rooms they hadn't entered. Steve Jobs was notoriously unpredictable in ways that kept his entire organization perpetually sharp, perpetually guessing, perpetually performing at the edge of their capability. None of these people were being fake. That's the crucial distinction. And it's the one that most people miss entirely. Being unreadable is not about deception. It's about dimension. It's about having enough interior depth that no single interaction can exhaust your mystery. It's about understanding that you are under no obligation to make yourself completely legible to everyone who looks at you. And when you start to internalize this, when you actually feel it in your body, not just understand it intellectually, something shifts. You stop trying to be understood in every conversation. You stop over-explaining your decisions. You stop justifying yourself to people who haven't earned the explanation. Here's what nobody tells you about emotional legibility. When you consistently show people your emotional reactions, when you let them see exactly what excites you, what threatens you, what makes you insecure, you're not connecting with them. You're giving them a map. And people use maps. That's what maps are for. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil that the noble type of man feels himself to be the determiner of values. He doesn't need external validation. He doesn't need to be understood. The depth of a person, he argued, is measured precisely by how much they can contain without needing to express. Think about that. The depth of a person is measured by how much they can contain without needing to express. Right now, you are probably over-expressing. You are probably filling silences that didn't need to be filled. You are probably explaining things that would have been more powerful left unexplained. You are probably broadcasting anxiety in situations where stillness would have communicated 10 times more authority. This is not a moral failing. This is conditioning. You were trained by school, by social media, by every relationship you've ever been in, to perform your inner life for an audience, to signal your alignment, your values, your emotional availability, and every time you did that, you made yourself smaller. You handed someone else the advantage of knowing you better than you knew them. The correction is not to become emotionally dead. The correction is to develop emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel things deeply while choosing deliberately what to reveal, when to reveal it, and to whom. This is one of the rarest skills in modern human interaction, and the people who have it don't announce it. You only notice it in retrospect. You walk away from a conversation with them realizing they know a great deal about you, and you know almost nothing about them. And somehow, instead of feeling manipulated, you feel intrigued. You want to understand them more. You find yourself thinking about them. That pull you feel? That's the magnetism of controlled depth. That's what you're building toward. Let's get specific about how readability destroys you in the 3 arenas where it matters most: power, attraction, and negotiation. In power dynamics, the person who can be predicted is the person who can be bypassed. Think about your professional life. Think about the colleagues, the bosses, the peers who consistently get what they want: better assignments, better treatment, more resources, more respect. Are they the most transparent people in the room? Almost never. They are the people whose next move is never completely obvious. They create just enough uncertainty that other people stay engaged, stay attentive, stay a little bit off balance. This is not accidental. This is a learnable, deployable skill. It starts with something as simple as not answering every question immediately, with not having a visible reaction to every piece of news, with learning to sit comfortably in silence while other people rush to fill the air with words that reveal their position. When you pause before you respond, not artificially, not performatively, but genuinely, you do something powerful. You signal that your words are considered. You create the impression of depth even in the act of thinking, and you deny the other person the instant read of your reaction, which means they cannot calibrate their strategy to your response in real time. In attraction, readability is death. This sounds harsh, but sit with it for a moment. Every relationship that has ever gone cold, romantic or otherwise, went cold the moment complete predictability set in. Not because of routine, not because of comfort, but because the other person ran out of territory to explore. They finished the map. There was nowhere left to go. The most captivating people you have ever encountered were not captivating because of their looks or their status or their accomplishments. They were captivating because they always seemed to contain more than they showed. Every conversation revealed something, but suggested 3 things you hadn't yet discovered. They were dynamic. They were layered. They were, in the oldest sense of the word, mysterious. You can develop this, but it requires dismantling the habit of completeness, the compulsion to finish every story you start, to explain every opinion you hold, to make sure people understand you fully before the conversation ends. Incompleteness is a hook. It creates the psychological need to return. In negotiation, and everything is a negotiation, the readable person has already lost before the first offer is made. The moment the other side can accurately model your priorities, your constraints, and your threshold for walking away, they will structure every interaction to extract maximum value from you while giving as little as possible in return. This is not malice. This is rational optimization. It's what intelligent parties do when given complete information. The antidote is not deception. It's restraint. It's the discipline to not confirm what you actually want, to keep your reservation price genuinely uncertain, to introduce elements of your position that complicate their model without lying about anything, to understand that in any high-stakes interaction, the side with more information has more power, and you should never voluntarily close that gap in the wrong direction. Now, here's where the conversation gets uncomfortable, and I want you to stay with it because this is the part most people skip. Being unreadable is not a neutral trait. It costs something. There are relationships you will not have, connections you will not form, moments of genuine warmth that will not happen, not because you're incapable of them, but because you've developed the discipline to choose carefully when and where to be known. Most people will find this too high a price. They will read everything we've talked about and agree with it intellectually, and then they will go back to oversharing in the next conversation because the short-term comfort of being understood is more powerful than the long-term advantage of strategic depth. This is the sorting mechanism. This is how the people who move through the world at a different level self-select from the ones who remain perpetually managed. Robert Greene, building explicitly on Machiavelli's foundations in the 48 Laws of Power, made this observation explicit when he wrote about the law of court attention, that the most dangerous mistake you can make is to outshine your masters, because visibility creates vulnerability. The people who last, who compound their influence over time, are the ones who understand that power flows toward those who are sought, not those who are constantly present. Being constantly present, emotionally, socially, intellectually, performing yourself for continuous audience approval is the civilian version of this mistake. You are making yourself completely available, completely decipherable, and wondering why people treat you as furniture rather than as an event. Furniture is familiar. Furniture is readable. Furniture is always exactly where you expect it to be. You are not trying to be furniture. Here is a truth that Nietzsche circled around for his entire career, without ever quite stating this baldly. The self is not something you discover, it's something you construct, and the most powerful self-constructions in history have always had protected depths, interiority that was deliberately managed, not carelessly exposed. This isn't artifice, this is architecture. When you decide to become less readable, you are not becoming less real, you are becoming more structured. You are building a self that has load-bearing walls, a self that can withstand examination without collapsing into either over-justification or hollow silence. You are developing what the ancient Stoics called the interior citadel, a place inside yourself that no one can access without your explicit permission. Marcus Aurelius, who ran the most powerful empire on earth while privately documenting his anxieties and uncertainties in his meditations, understood this perfectly. Those journals were never meant to be published. They were the readable version, the version he showed only to himself. To the world, he was the philosopher king, measured and deliberate, and never fully known. The contrast between those two documents, the private record and the public presence, is itself a masterclass in psychological architecture. You get to have a private record. You are under no obligation to publish it. But here is the deepest cut. Here is the thing that will sit with you after everything else fades. The reason most people resist becoming unreadable, the real reason, underneath all the justifications about authenticity and connection and being true to themselves, is not philosophical. It's not even ethical. It's fear. It's the fear that if they stop performing their inner life for an audience, they'll stop existing in a meaningful way. That without the constant external validation of being understood, they won't know who they are. That their identity requires a witness to be real. And this is the most devastating form of psychological dependency there is, because it means that your sense of self is not actually located inside you. It's located in other people's perceptions of you. You are not a person. You are a reflection. You exist in the looking glass version of yourself that other people construct and hand back to you. The unreadable person has broken this loop, not through coldness, not through trauma, but through the slow, deliberate process of becoming their own primary audience, of learning to validate their own experience without requiring it to be witnessed, of building enough interior certainty that other people's readings of them become interesting data points rather than existential verdicts. This is the aha moment. This is what all of it has been building toward. The psychology of being unreadable is not about controlling other people. It is about freeing yourself from being controlled by their perception of you. Every technique, every discipline, every moment of strategic silence or deliberate restraint, it's not directed outward, it's directed inward. It's the practice of becoming so solid in your own interiority that the need for constant external legibility simply dissolves. When you reach that place, and it is a place you have to build, not find, everything changes, not because the world treats you differently, though it will. Not because you become more powerful in rooms full of other people, though you will, but because you stop needing rooms full of people to confirm who you are. So here's what I want you to sit with after this ends. You have spent years making yourself readable. You have invested enormous energy in being understood, in explaining yourself, justifying yourself, performing yourself for people who were using that performance to calibrate how to handle you. And most of the time, you called that connection. It wasn't connection, it was legibility. And legibility is not the same thing as being known. The people who actually know you, the ones who earn that, they earn it because you chose to let them in, not because you couldn't help but broadcast yourself. The difference between those two things is the difference between intimacy and exposure, and you deserve intimacy. But intimacy requires selection. It requires the discipline to be incomplete with most people so that your completeness with a few actually means something. Start noticing, this week, where you over-explain, where you rush to fill silence with information about yourself, where you react visibly when you could have stayed still. These are not character flaws. They are habits, and habits can be rebuilt. Become the person in the room that people leave thinking about. Not because you performed the most, but because you revealed just enough to suggest that the rest of you is worth finding. If this struck something in you, if it cracked something open that you've been circling around for a while, subscribe, because this is not the last uncomfortable truth we'll build together. The most powerful thing you can say to a world that wants to read you is simply this: you haven't seen enough yet.